In 1939, Bob Kane and Bill Finger created a character who would be cemented into modern mythology and become an iconic figure in pop culture to this very day. It was in Detective Comics issue 27 that they debuted the Batman, the world's greatest detective, the Caped Crusader, the Defender of Gotham. And whilst in modern years he is known as somewhat of a lone soldier, a hero by himself, Batman has a vast history of having a rather wide variety of allies and sidekicks. It all started in Detective Comics issue number 38. So yeah, it was only less than a year and a measly 11 comic book issues before Robin would join Batman. And because of this, he has become more integral to the Dark Knight story than almost any other character. Even the Joker wouldn't appear for a few more months, and Alfred a whole 2 more years, which, by the way, is so baffling to think. Now, I understand that in years of late, the iconic duo have fallen apart, most notably in cinema, and it is in no small part due to the associations the boy wonder has with the campiness of the Golden and Silver Ages. But Robin has so much more to offer than just bright colours and holy molies. He is not only a core piece of the Batman and the mythos around him, but is in himself a deep and interesting comic book figure. So, after going through his history as briefly as I can, and sharing with you a comic book story, actually, that personally I think is redefining in modern comic book literature to the meaning of Robin, I want to prove to you guys that Robin is not only still cool, but he is worthy of every form of adaptation and should appear in every version of the Batman universe, whether that's comic books, video games, TV shows or movies. From James Gunn's campy new DCU to the serious tones of the Matt Reeves The Batman to the whatever the next inevitable Batman video game franchise is, right? I think Robin needs to be given the respect he deserves, and I really just want to go over that in this video. But I don't want to hold you guys here at the opening for so long. So welcome to Homoto House. Let's talk. If you're watching this, you probably know the origins of Batman and Robin and many of their excellent adventures together. And so I'm not going to rehash the last 80 years of comic books to you. That's really not what I want to do with this video. But I would like to go over some key points from each of 4 of the main Robins and just go over some of the things that many of us even may have forgotten, or just things that I think can really give us a new perspective on how to look at these characters. Dick Grayson was introduced to make Batman more relatable, understandable, and they were kind of mirror images of each other initially. They were both orphans, they both hated the crime of Gotham City, they both donned spandex and fought crime. But where Batman turned to darkness, Robin saw light. He was a spark of hope in the fear-ridden city of Gotham. And not only that, but he was the first sidekick and the first young superhero in comic books. One can argue maybe Superman was, given we had younger stories of when he was but a boy being a hero by this point. But really, as a new character who was fleshed out and being a hero, Robin was the first. And that showed a lot of audiences that we can have anyone put on a mask and be the hero, young to old, which is the first of many tales I think you can tell with Robin. This idea that it doesn't matter who you are, you can be the hero, which is kind of that Spider-Man concept that sells him so well, and they constantly like to retell with that, and not for any bad reason. It's a brilliant concept. But what's beautiful about Robin, especially Dick Grayson, is there's even more to his character than just this type of tale. We can take it steps further. He was a core part of Batman, yes, and Robin would remain as one. But beyond that, Dick Grayson became a symbol in the comics. Throughout an entire generation, he became a symbol of evolution, of change. Dick Grayson separated and then became more than Batman. He was outside of Gotham. They used him as a lead for the Teen Titans initially, which, once again, was the first young team of superheroes, and established that people like to read younger heroes as well as older ones. There is a teen demographic who enjoy seeing themselves in the concept of these suits. And he was their leader. He was this iconic figurehead. So I don't want to hear, we can't do it, he's too young, it's too silly having a child in the streets. We went past that in the 60s. We can move past that. This is a universe where we have Aquaman and aliens that are superheroes flying around the city, and we've got a speedster, and Kid Flash is a superhero name that's respected and required for the DC universe. Come on. Robin is completely fine. I know what you're thinking. Joining a team, it's nothing special. Any hero joined a team. In fact, pretty much every hero has joined some team at some point. So him joining the Teen Titans, unless it's where he stays for the rest of comics, it doesn't mean much. But as I and almost all of you know and love about Dick, he goes beyond the Teen Titans. He develops into his own hero. He leaves Gotham and moves to Bloodhaven, a city that in many ways is worse than Gotham because it doesn't have Batman and hasn't had Batman. And he takes a new name. He becomes his own Cape Crusader, but without the cape. He takes a darker approach, a more his own hero take, but with this sense of light and happiness in it. His own spin on the Batman. A better Batman. He becomes Nightwing. This is the growth I spoke about earlier with Dick. He left the role as the first sidekick in comic books, and he became the first sidekick to actually become a hero of his own. It took time, but he did something no one else in comics had ever done before and hasn't really done since. He changed, he grew. They let him evolve. He doesn't need what Bruce needs to be a hero. He doesn't need a strict set of rules. He isn't a monster under the cowl. He learned from Bruce and became his own character. Honestly, something I'd love to see develop in other media, outside of when it initially happened. Really, we rarely get to see it. We either see Dick Grayson as Robin, or we see Dick Grayson as Nightwing, and I think that growth is a beautiful tale that deserves to be told again. In 1983, Jason Todd would be introduced as Robin, a whole year before Dick Grayson became Nightwing, and at the time somewhat as a carbon copy, but over time he would be reimagined, and not long after his introduction, he was used to represent the grungier elements of Gotham. A somewhat darker take on the Robin mantle. Honestly, I think we should see way more of this part of Jason. The earlier years, the formative elements. Batman stands against the crime and darkness of Gotham. It's the one thing he swears to vanquish. But in a unique way, Jason is born from it. A criminal for hire as a father and a drug-addicted mother led to a rather dark and horrific upbringing for the boy. And I think this is an element we rarely get to see delving into. And to those of you who say Robin is a too happy character, he's too bright to fit into the darker versions of Batman, take Matt Reeves for example, it's Jason's early years who I point to. It's these darker elements. A young boy brought up with the traumatic surrounding of Gotham City, and he uses the costume as an escape. For Jason, putting on the mask is a way to finally fit in, and to kind of get revenge on the city that troubled him for so long. It's a coping mechanism of sorts, and I think it's something you can really delve into and have a look at. Robin for Jason is this sort of spark of hope that he didn't have in the horrible city that he lived in. He's not just bringing hope to the Gothamites around him, but he's doing it for himself. And I think this is something that was different with Dick. Dick was always a good kid, and he didn't need the outlet of Robin always. But Jason did. Because without this, he would have became just like his parents before him. But of course, Batman was too comfortable from raising Dick Grayson, and made a mistake, leading to an event we all know. Death in the family. Jason's death was not only one of the first major comic book deaths, but also it lasted for quite some time. And you likely already know this, but it was voted on by fans, which gave us some sort of say for the first time in a major comic book event. Sure, in modern years we learned that a lot of those votes were rigged and affected dramatically by particular individuals, but it was a big deal. And beyond that, it's incredibly important for Bruce. It reminded Bruce that not only did he lose his parents, but he can lose anyone he lets into his life. And I think this is an interesting concept to see Batman coping with it. To see him reeling back from that concept. We get a lot of modern Red Hood content in animated stuff, and even in the Arkham Knight video game, which it's crazy I think it was 10 years ago. But it's always a long time after Jason's died. It's always Jason coming back and being reminded of the loss he once had, but we rarely get to see Batman reeling from that loss as a recent thing. As much as I'm not a big fan of the Snyder universe and his movies, one thing I'll give credit for is they really set this undertone at the start anyway, that Bruce was still recovering from a traumatic loss in the form of a Robin. Sure, they kind of dropped that tone quite early on into those movies, and it was never really explained, but it's a concept I'd like to see more often used, a Batman who is still reeling. That's something we're going to get into when I talk about Tim in a little bit, but Jason as a whole left that mark on Bruce. Jason as Robin is a brilliant tale, and the whole Under the Red story is one of my favourite comic books. Him coming back and all this, and I don't think it's needed though, not anymore. I just spoke to you about how great I'd love to see young Jason as Robin is, and I stand by that. And I just spoke about how I'd love to see Batman reeling from the death. But we have seen a lot of Jason's early formative years as the Red Hood. A lot. Whenever he seems to be introduced into any media outside of comic books, it's always the same story of Jason's came back with a vengeance. He's angry, and he raises the moral questions to Bruce. And it is one of my favourite stories of all time. Honestly, I'm a Red Hood fan till the day I die. But it's not great for Jason. I want to talk real quick about Batman, and then I'm going to continue with that train of thought though. See, for Batman, Jason Todd's Under the Red Hood is a perfect story, and I think it would be lovely to see in live action. It'd be great for the character, and it'd show a lot of people these stories that are really interesting about him. And I actually think it's really important the way he tackles this question of he lost a son because of his own actions, and he refuses to kill since then. But Jason raises the question that he should. At least kill the man who killed him. Stop him from killing all the countless people he's killed since. But Jason always comes off as being very emotional, very overdriven, and kind of moody. And in comic books, he's evolved past this, and I'm somewhat fed up of seeing the same side rehashed over and over. He's grown far beyond that, became a more independent character. And this is where I want to talk about Jason now. I think Jason deserves to be told stories outside of being a Robin. Jason has so much stuff going on inside of comic books. And I'd love to see that stuff brought to life in other adaptations, because it proves that he really is an interesting and deep character. I think he's misunderstood by a lot of people. Honestly, if you'd like to see the kind of story that I'm referring to when I talk about Jason here, before we continue, I recommend picking up, it's a fairly modern comic book. It's called Batman Urban Legends. It ran on for quite a few issues, but I recommend picking up, I think it's the first 5 or 6 issues. It's an anthology series, so you'll get some other adventures in as well, not just Red Hood. But over the issues, it's multi-part stories. And across, I believe it was the first 6, there was a Red Hood story. And it is brilliant. Or at least the first sort of half of it was really good. The second half is a generic sort of fun superhero comic book adventure, which if you like that stuff, great. But the first half delves into some concepts with Red Hood and keeps you on top of the fact that he has grown and changed. And I thought that was really fun. So I recommend picking that up. That being Batman Urban Legends. The other one, of course, any Red Hood fan will tell you, go read Red Hood and the Outlaws. It adds so much to him. Both the first version of it and the second version of the team as well. A year after Jason died, Tim Drake stormed onto the scene and took up the mantle of Robin. You might have noticed I didn't really mention too much about the Robin elements of Jason and Dick. I spoke more about Dick's evolution into Nightwing and Jason's death and the grungier elements of Gotham that he represented. That's because I was saving it for Tim. I also mentioned earlier that I'd talk more about Batman's brutality with Tim. And that's really because when Tim came onto the scene, Batman was in a darker place. He was a lot edgier of a character. You know, it was kind of an edgier period in comics as a whole, but he was getting very brutal, very dark. And Tim came on to fix that. He recognised that Bruce needed a Robin. And since then, time and time again, Tim has proven that he embodies what it means to be Robin. So in this chapter, I really want to talk about not only how Tim can be used in media and how he can make for brilliant stories, or you can take elements from his stories and give them to Dick Grayson or Jason Todd or Damian. But I also want to talk about why it is that I personally believe Tim is the definitive Robin. Before I dive into those key elements I just mentioned, I'd like to remind you all that there's a big emphasis in the Batman media on how perfect the animated series was. And I'm in no way trying to contradict that. It truly is a masterpiece. But something to remember, in that series, Robin is there from pretty much the get-go. And from season 3 onwards, it's Tim. This is a TV series that has 7 different shows, adding up to a total of 20 seasons. Tim Drake was that Robin. He defined a generation who all looked to him as the definitive Robin. I mean, sure, he wasn't really Robin in Batman Beyond, per se, because that was in the future. But he was the iconic one still at that point anyway. This, combined with Tim Drake's heavier focus on the detective elements and less so the combat elements, I think brought a whole group of fans together to view Robin as a necessary element within the Batcave, but being less so the fighter, the combative one that Bruce is. And I think this dynamic works incredibly well. I really want to lean into the fact that Tim's a detective element, because I think if you take those elements and use them on a young Dick Grayson, that could make for a great Robin in the Matt Reeves universe, who's really leaning into the dark detective noir style of Batman. But beyond that, Tim is Robin for a whole generation of people. And I think that's not something to be scoffed at. Past that, if we look to his early days, when Nightfall happened, an event many of you will know is when Batman broke his back and Azrael took over. Robin had no Batman. Azrael doesn't count. He broke all of Batman's rules and Robin stood against him. So Robin left, but unlike Dick, who left and had to become something new, or Jason, who died, Tim left and stayed Robin. Robin never left him. And I think this is a core fundamental element to him and why he is that. As much as DC have tried in the past, they haven't been able to make him grow. They haven't forced him to evolve. Tim needs Robin and Robin needs Tim. There's a bunch of other elements, like obviously Tim did take up other monikers. He was Drake for a while, as much as we all laugh at that. And he was Red Robin, which had a few questionable outfits. But beyond that, he always falls back to the same old position. He is Robin Eternal. And there are some elements in Tim's personality that I think really explain this. Number one, I already mentioned, Tim is the minds behind everything. He is the brains of the Bat family. Number two, Tim is an optimist. He is a very bright character, very reminiscent of early Robin character. He reminds you of young Dick Grayson or anything from the Golden Age sort of elements when he is Robin, because he has that bubbly persona in the suit. Honestly, I think if you're going to pick a Robin in an established world, Tim is the defining feature. And if rumours about James Gunn's Batman are to be true, and the whole Bat family are pretty much going to be present, I would really love to see how Tim is coping with Damian taking up the mantle of Robin, because that's a really interesting dynamic. Time and time again, Tim Drake returns to the mantle, to the point where in present day, he is referred to as Robin Eternal. And I think Gotham needs that, and I think it's an interesting story to tell of a city where the one most consistent hero outside of Batman is the light. It is the brightness. He doesn't inspire fear like Bruce does. He doesn't leave them behind like Dick, and he isn't angry like Jason. He's simply hope. Throughout all the Robins, they have had impacts on Batman, but it hasn't always been as visibly noticeable consistently. Dick obviously had an impact, and so did Jason with his death. Tim stayed and remains to keep him in line and in check, but honestly, out of all of the Robins, I think Damian, with its introduction especially, has the biggest impact on Bruce. See, young Bruce Wayne in his early days as Batman was violent, aggressive, and kind of a different hero all in all. He had different lines in the sand and a different attitude towards fighting crime, and Damian idolises that, especially when he first appears, and almost embraces that personality when he writes off the killing rule. He becomes an early Batman, and seeing Bruce have to teach Damian everything he has learned from his own Robins as he has grown, I think is a beautiful tale to show you just how much Batman changes, just how much he grows. Honestly, Damian's introduction was rough at first. A lot of people weren't happy with it, a lot of people thought it was a bit forced, a bit silly, a bit needless. And I think this is sort of added to by the fact that Batman wasn't without a Robin when Damian came. Tim, as I just said, is still Robin. So, who was Damian replacing? What was his need? But I think it wasn't what he was replacing, but it was what he was bringing to the table that's important. He gave Batman clear growth. Something that's been really difficult to show with that kind of character. And I think Damian is a really interesting concept, because Batman isn't learning from the Robins and raising them and figuring it out. He's showing Damian what he'd already learned. Honestly, I think Damian can be used in loads of ways, and he brings tons of elements to the Bat family. He reintroduces the League of Assassins, he questions the killing rule, and without just being Jason, he adds another side to the dynamic of whose side is everyone on when there's debates and issues in the stories. What's really interesting, though, is he often falls on Batman's side to an extremist point of view, which is really interesting to see. Of course, there's always the question of who inherits the cowl as well, and I think for Dick Grayson's character it's important that he doesn't. I think it's important that Dick Grayson remains Nightwing. There's always been the question of, well, Jason can't do it, and Tim wouldn't accept it because he is Robin to the core. So I think having Damian be the next Batman works beautifully. Of course, you've got Terry McGinnis if you're a Batman Beyond fan, but it's a concept nonetheless. And as much as I agree with many people that lineages, especially like heir to the titles in comic books, is a very bad way of writing them, with Batman it's a bit different solely because of the reason he became the figure. He wants to be an immortal concept for the city, and Damian taking that up I think is really interesting, especially with his links to the Lazarus bit. Raising Dick taught Bruce not to push his sons away, and he is so transparent about this with Damian. He wants to give him a home, make him feel heard, a member of the family. Bruce trusts Damian's training. He lets him come and go as he pleases. He brings him to the League. Raising Dick also taught Batman, from then on, that a teammate can be of great benefit to him, his mission, and Gotham as a whole. And so every one of the Robins was more accepting, or he was more accepting of their help from then on. I think if we took a young Bruce from around the time he got Dick Grayson, and if Damien was dropped on his doorstep then, I honestly don't know if he'd have adopted him. I think he would have taken him in, questioned him, and been confused what to do, and eventually would have pushed Damien away. Jason taught Batman to notice the darker side in those he trained. He made sure to listen to Tim's lighter elements after Jason died, and with Damien, he made sure to snuff out any form of League of Assassin control that was still in his mind. Especially the killing stuff, but also just the darker elements in Damien. He wants Damien to grow to be a better hero. Tim taught Bruce that it's okay to have an equal. Tim, unlike the other Robins, isn't really a sidekick as he is a partner. Especially when you consider the fact that he is a brilliant detective as good as Batman himself. And when we see how Bruce looks after Damien, it is on this partner scale. They go on missions together. Sure, Batman is somewhat in charge, but Damien goes off and does his own thing, and then when they are working together, Damien is given an equal say in what happens. He is treated as an equal. I only spoke about 4 of the Robins in this video, and I'm really sorry to any Cassie fans, or Duke fans, or any other Robin fans out there that didn't get their Robin spoken about here. Maybe I'll do a video on each of them in the future. I could do individual videos fully delving into each of the Robins that I covered in this video on their own videos 10 times over. But I really wanted to sort of keep this video brief, and I'll talk about more of that in the next chapter. But I also wanted to just talk about the core elements of Robin and what makes me love him so much, and why I think he's actually a really cool character who deserves a lot more than I think modern media gives him, and a lot more respect than things treat him with. How even the Arkham games, which I adore, give Robin a bit of flack. They go out of their way to over the top to try and make it look like, hey guys, we made him cool. And even then, they basically push him to the sidelines in every game he's actually in. But I really feel that Robin, as a whole, deserves a lot more respect. Right, now for the completely unscripted bit. I rambled in all the other chapters, but this bit entirely, I just wanted to talk to you guys about the channel and about this video and stuff like that. I wanted my first video on the channel to be about something I found really positive and good in the DC universe. Or just any geeky universe, really. Not specifically DC. That's just what we ended up talking about. Just in geekdom as a whole, something I thought was really good, really positive. And the first thing that came to my mind was a comic book. One moment. Was a comic book. Sorry about that. This one. Right, I hope that's in focus. It's Robin and Batman. And I was originally going to spend this the fifth chapter, sorry, talking to you guys about what happens in these comics and why they are perfect. Why they are so brilliant. And I realised that's not what I want to do. But I think it's important first to look at why they came up in mind, you know. They are a beautiful story telling Dick Grayson's early days with Batman, and they delve into the psyche of both Bruce and Dick really well. I'd love to delve into Bruce's psyche in a future video, just putting that out there. But they cover it in such a brilliant way, and it's a fairly modern comic. I will link to where you can buy it in the description if you'd like. But it is brilliant. However, I don't want to just sit here and read the story to you. I'd rather you go and read it yourself. It's a must-read, in my opinion, of modern comic books. Instead, I'd like to talk about what it was I loved about it, and I realised it gave Robin respect, and it told an interesting story because of it. And so I decided to do a video just going over the Robins and some cool things about them and why I think they deserve all of that. And I know this video was very messy. It was very, I didn't go in depth in any one area. It was very open, vague, and jumping between the different Robins, which is not how future videos will really be. I will go in depth on individual concepts as I talk about them, but I wanted the first one to just sort of be chill, just putting the vibes out there sort of thing. I also really wanted to keep it positive and only talk about good things, and that's what I'm going to do on this channel. I want to remind us all what it is we love about these geeky worlds and this geeky stuff, any fandom, any fan base, and why it is that sometimes we get a bit angry or sometimes we get a bit emotional about them, and remind us what it is that we actually want from these by looking at the good sides. I'm not saying that there isn't a reason why we have the negative content that we have around this stuff, but I would like to add to the positive element of it. Honestly, this whole video has been a little bit crazy to make. I recorded the whole thing once already, my data file was corrupted, and I've had to redo the whole thing. So I'm trying to think what I said last time I did this bit. That's it, I'm gonna tell you guys what plans I have for the future of the channel as well. So I don't have an upload schedule, I kinda just want to make videos as I feel they should be made. As for the type of videos, I'm going to be doing some video essays similar to this, but going in depth on certain concepts. The other one I'd love to do is talk about what if I wrote, or what if I was in charge of blank. I think that's a really fun video concept, and in those ones I will go on so many tangents talking about the elements I love about different things. And of course, if there are other video types that any of you watching this think would be cool, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll say at the end of every video, just feel free to put any suggestions out there. And the other thing is, I just want to maintain this idea of talking about the good elements in these worlds. But yeah, I thank you all for watching. This has been Hermosa House, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.